To keep every cog in wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering. Hi all, Dr. Clark here, and this intro lecture is actually the intro lab. I just want to cover the lab manual or the lab resource that we're going to use in this course. It's a lab manual that I wrote, and so you will have access to all my materials. I will post labs as single writable documents to you, but realize that it's coming from a larger piece of work, okay, that has already been published and copyrighted. So we're going to go through this, and so you might see some things in this video that don't make sense to you or you don't get access to, and that's really because it's for the lab manual is for students that are live with classes and that under normal circumstances we'd be in the lab at least once or twice a week and doing different labs and different components of each lab. So with that being said, though, we can do majority of these labs virtually, and if we're not going to do them virtually, we'll do pieces of them live, and then other pieces will be virtual. Okay? So you're going to hear me go over the safety equipment. So this will be our safety in the laboratory situation. We've kind of already talked about some of this, but we're going to cover more of it next week when we do our first lab. I'll take you into the lab and we'll do kind of a Google Meet, or we're going to do some kind of safety stuff there. Okay, we'll go over proper attire. Proper attire for labs means that your legs are covered, your toes are covered. Okay, ladies and gentlemen that have long hair, that you bring a hair tie and you pull your hair up so it doesn't have a chance of getting in chemicals or in the flame, etc. Appropriate behavior, there's no horsing around. Okay, no food and drink, we've already talked about this. If safety equipment is required, I will provide it for you. Okay, whether that be protective gloves or tongs or whatever it might be that we're interested in. I'll show you where the first aid kits are, the eye wash stations, broken glass disposal, sharps container, fire blanket, fire extinguishers. Okay. All right, so we'll cover that in more detail in that first lab. Okay. Now, for those of you who are doing it virtually, obviously the lab safety is not needed. You're going to watch my hands do the work, and you're going to answer the material from that kind of demonstration of how the lab is done. That all being said, there are some key things that you have to be able to, key features that you need to be able to do at the ending of a typical general biology, advanced bio, intro bio, whatever you want to call it, course. In college, there are a few things that have been deemed by many instructors, myself included, that are important for students to know how to do. Number one, proper use of a microscope. This would include the ability to make slides, to examine slides, to write about and do sketches on the material on that slide. Okay. Number two, calculate statistics, design tables, figures, interpret tables, figures, okay, work with numbers, okay, from a scientific point of view. The third one would be drawing and labeling of different structures, features, okay, whether that be whole organisms through a dissection or an organism under a microscope, you have to have the ability to sketch that organism and label that sketch. Okay. And then the final thing would be scientific writing. Knowing how to write a scientific report, okay, and do that well. So this is what we call, or what I call, a skills exam. I'm going to test all of you, every student who's taking my class, okay, on the skills, these 4 skills, and your ability to do them. Okay, so we're going to look at the compound microscope. Okay, when we start talking about microscope use, okay, we're going to talk about how to make wet mounts, how to actually make a slide and examine that slide. Okay, so we'll progress through, and I'll provide you, examples of exactly what you need to know. Okay, how the exam's going to be set up, and it'll all be provided for you as we progress and get closer to examination time. Okay? You'll have plenty of practice to know how to do this. Okay? But I just wanted to make you aware of what you're going to be tested on eventually. Okay? So that brings me to Lab 1, maybe. Lab 1. Before I get to Lab 1, though, I want you guys to know that you all have a link to my YouTube channel. And so if you don't understand how to do a lab, or maybe you came to the lab and you need just a little bit of a refresher, the labs have been demonstrated for you, and the videos are put up on my YouTube channel. Okay, so you can always go to my YouTube channel. You can look up biology labs, you can look up advanced bio labs, and you can find the labs and the demonstrations of those labs. Okay, so the very first lab that we're going to be interested in is a generalized lab about writing lab reports. So we're going to go through how to write a lab report, how to construct a lab report, what pieces should be present in a lab report, and kind of how you go about constructing a well-written scientific lab report. Okay. And so we're going to cover the majority of this. So I'm not going to go through each little piece. You can read the pieces, but I'm going to give you the highlights for those of you who are doing this virtually. Okay? So the very first part of your lab report is going to be a title. Okay? And it's often a title page. And in this course and a lot of other courses, on that title page, you should have a concise, descriptive title. Something that describes to the reader what the lab report is going to be about, okay, but not in so much detail that it's more than a sentence long. Okay, so it should be concise but descriptive, and it should be related to the lab report, okay, directly to the lab report. So if we're doing a lab report on, say, photosynthesis, and you write the title to your paper is green plants, okay, that's not going to do it. I mean, that's not it is concise, but it's not descriptive. It's not telling individuals what that lab report is about. It's about green plants. Well, what about green plants? Your descriptive title should not have more questions for the reader. It shouldn't make the reader think, I wonder what they did. Okay, it should be descriptive enough that they know at least a portion of what you did in that lab report. Okay. A couple other things. Remember, if you're going to use the common name of a species, the scientific name needs to be introduced, and it should be introduced in the title. So if you write a lab report about humans, and you should have Homo sapien in italics in the lab report, in the title of the lab report. So people know what species you're testing the material on. If it's a bunch of species, then you can do a generalized term. So if you're testing, or your lab report's about a whole group of fish, then you can just say fishes of a certain lake, fishes of a certain stream, fishes, etc. So if it's a bunch of organisms, then you don't have to list them all in your title. But if you're looking at a single organism or a couple organisms, it's preferred that you put it in your title so individuals know what it's about. The other thing is, really key component to this, is you have to have the contact information for the authors of that scientific report. So if you have multiple authors, you should have contact information for all those authors. Especially in coursework, you need to have that. If you're writing this for a scientific journal, obviously this would be kind of the contact page, and only one person would be the main contact for that. Maybe one person and a backup person would be the main contact for that paper, if there's multiple authors. But again, you have to have some kind of contact information on that title page. And it is the very first thing that people should see. Now, I often get from students, well, can I put a picture on it? Yeah, if you would like to put a picture on it, that's completely fine. But remember, in a course, a true scientific course, if you put a picture on, say, a title page, you need to cite that picture unless you took the picture yourself, and then you should give credit to yourself or a group member that took the picture. But if you did not take that picture, you have to cite that picture. So a lot of people, if you're going to add things like pictures to kind of spice it up or make it more appealing, remember, you need citations for those photos. You got to give individuals credit for their work. The next piece on a separate page, so the title page is on its own page, the abstract's on its own page, is the abstract. The abstract should be no more than 250 words. In fact, most journals will have a far less word count than 250 words, but in this case, 250 words or less. Your abstract should summarize the entire paper. That means you should have parts of the introduction, something to attract, the reader, some background information. You should have parts of your methods, maybe an interesting methodology that you used. You should have some legitimate results, actual results that are found in your study. It doesn't have to be all of them. It could just be the important pieces or what you feel are important. They should be in the abstract. Then you should have conclusion or discussion, where you're tying your research, you're tying your results to other people's work, and you're basically telling individuals what can it do, what does your paper, what does your research do to progress that field, or how does it compare to other research that's been published before. Next, you will have an introduction. The introduction should start off very broad and with good background information. Again, citations from peer-reviewed literature. We'll talk more about this as you're progressing, but citations from peer-reviewed scientific literature is what I want to see in introductions. And you're going to go from a topic that's very broad down to something very specific. That something that's very specific is going to be the hypothesis for your research, or the hypotheses for your research. So you might have multiple hypotheses, or the objectives. So if you're not writing your research, maybe you're doing large, broad scale ecological studies, and maybe you don't have hypotheses, but rather you have objectives. You're attempting to correlate one thing with another, or attempting to look at community ecology, where you're not going to have a hypothesis. It's not cut and dry, yes or no kind of answers. It's more broad scale mapping of, maybe you're creating, food webs or something like that. These are going to be objectives of the study versus hypotheses. But those are still going to go at the end of the introduction. Okay? That's telling the reader specifically, what is this paper looking at? What is the question and the hypothesis that goes along with that question? What is the question and objectives that go along with that question? Okay. Again, when we start talking about writing and using citations and using peer-reviewed material, a lot of students, you've been taught how to quote. However, in scientific writing, there are no quotes. Scientists don't really quote. What scientists do is they take information from other scientists' published material, and they paraphrase it. They rewrite it, and then they cite it. It's rare that you see quotations. Quotations normally in a scientific paper is something, it's commonly known material, and it's like a statement that a scientist said that you want to add to your paper, just because it kind of adds a little more oomph or a little more power to it, like a good quote from a scientist, maybe a quote from, if you're doing an ecology paper, maybe a quote from Aldo Leopold, where you're talking about intelligent tinkering is keeping all the parts, and you put that in quotes and give Aldo Leopold credit for that. Okay? That's fine. It doesn't do anything for your paper. You're not quoting him because he did a research project on the ecology of a certain stream or something like that. You're quoting him as kind of the father of ecology, or the father of the environmental movement, and where you're getting your ideas from. Okay? So no quotes, paraphrase and cite the material. Citations have to be within the text. Okay, we'll talk about two methods to cite, the two methods that are most common in scientific writing. Next would be the methods section. Okay? Methods section are not lists of procedures. Okay, it's not procedure number 1, we did this. Procedure number 2, we did this. It's also not lists of materials. Like, you don't have a list of pipettes, beakers, okay? We don't do any of that. That's what a lab manual does, but that's far different than a lab report. Okay? A lab report is written as a scientific document, not as a manual, a step-by-step process. That doesn't mean that in your methods, you're not stating how you did your research. You are stating how you did your research, but you're not stating procedure 1 was blah, blah, blah. Procedure 2 was blah, blah, blah. Instead, you say, we did this. The results from that were used in this, or the product from that was used in this. We used the product from that here. Okay? We collected, general information about the body of an organism, and then the experiment, we used experimental data, in this way. Okay? So you're giving the procedures, but you're not giving it a step 1, step 2, step 3. Okay? It's more flowing procedures. okay? And often it's ending with, after you start really broad in your methods, so where the study took place, what time it took place, okay? In some cases, who collected the data, okay? What organism are you interested in? And then you get more specific. What was the data you collected? What was the different tests or different experiments you did on that organism? Okay, and you get more specific. And then, you're getting so specific at the end of your methods that you're telling individuals, how did you analyze the data that was collected? What statistical package, what stats did you use to analyze this data? That's often how the method section in a scientific paper works. Next section is the results section. And just like the introduction, just like the methods, the results section also starts very general or very broad with the first part of your results, okay? Your results section never starts with a figure or a table, okay? It has to start with written information, and it can be general information. It can be, the average height of the organisms was this, the average weight of the organisms were this, okay? Things that you're not really testing, because you're like, hey, look, I'm not testing the average height of these plants. Okay, we're testing something else. Or I'm not testing the average height of these humans. We're testing something else. Okay, but you can start off with that general information to kind of ease the reader into when you start going through your exact results. What did the statistics find? Okay? You're going to present your results in either a figure form, okay? I shouldn't say either, and often both figures and tables, but you don't present your table information and then do a figure from that table. Okay? You don't use the same data and present it in two different forms. Okay? If you present it in a table, great. Have a figure that looks at something else. Maybe the figure looks at averages with standard deviations around those averages, but your table shows raw numbers or raw data. Okay? Or maybe you have a table that shows, the mean of, or the average of all these variables, and in your figure you show the statistical evidence on whether or not they are significantly different from each other. Okay. Again, we talked about this a little bit before, but when you are writing a table, you need to write a caption for that table, and that caption goes above the table. Okay? So it says table 1 and what the table is demonstrating. Okay? If it's a figure, okay, which is what most people would call a graph, okay, whether that be a pie graph, scattered graph, plot graph, whatever it might be, okay, that, when you write the caption, goes underneath the figure, okay, and it would say something like figure 1, okay, this figure demonstrates blah blah blah. Okay, so apart from just having figures and tables, you also need to reference your figures and tables inside the text. Sometimes this will come directly in your results. As you're writing your results, your written part of your results, you're directing the reader's attention to, hey, we are talking about the average of, height of these organisms. This can be seen in figure 1. Right? Other times, those references would come in your discussion section, or what sometimes people like to call conclusion section. Right? That will, you'll draw the attention to the reader. Hey, look, if you didn't notice this, it is significantly different. See table 1, or there is no significant difference between these two things. See figure 2. Okay, so you're drawing their attention back to the eye candy that you put in your paper in the form of tables and figures. Okay? Discussion is the opposite of the intro method results. Your discussion should start off very specific. Okay? Exactly what you found. Are your hypotheses supported? Did you achieve your objectives with significant results? Okay, that should be in the very first part of kind of the discussion. And then as the discussion goes, you broaden it back out. What is the real world application of what you're finding? Does your results, do they coincide with other people's results, other researchers' results? Okay? Do they contradict other researchers' results? That's fine too. Provide that information within your discussion. Okay? And then you're ending it all with the references that you used in the text. Okay, now it's key that you have to realize when you're talking about references, there are two main ways to reference material. Okay? But you need to make sure that you're only referencing the material that you actually used inside your document. Okay? So you're not going and pulling a bunch of references and then just listing all these references. Okay? It has to have been used inside your document. Okay? Now, two ways at which you can kind of reference your material. One which is called the superscript method. This is often done in journals that maybe your publications can't be very long, so they don't want to take up any space with the actual author and year of the publication after the paraphrase happens. So you just have a little superscript number. Right? That indicates, okay, number 1. Then they can go to your works cited or your reference page, and they can see, number 1, this is who the author is. Okay, so you can see an example of that here. Okay, so I paraphrased material from Lane's book on life ascending. Okay, the last ancestor humans shared with octopus was some sort of worm that lacked a proper eye. Thus, a human eye and octopus eye must have evolved independently, converging on the similar solution. There's the superscript number 1. Okay, that would be then brought over here, and you can see where that works came from. The second method, same material, same paraphrase, okay, but now we have, instead of having a superscript, okay, you have Lane, the last name of the author, and the year it was published. If there are multiple authors, okay, it would be last name, if there's 2, last name of the first author and the second author, the date. Okay. If there's a bunch of authors, more than 2, okay, it's going to be the last name of the first author and then the term et al, okay, and then the date. All right. In the case of the superscript, you don't have to worry about the et al or the double author or anything like that. You just put, a number that coincides to that reference material. Okay. All right. Writing styles. Real quick, we're going to try to go through some writing styles. The writing style is, the purpose of this is not to make everybody robots and not to make everybody write the exact same. Okay, that's one of the great things about writing, is that you can you can be your own person. You can have a writing style your own way. But in scientific writing, there is some notations that are very important to keep in mind. You should be using the appropriate abbreviations, and you should be using the metric units. So here's a table of appropriate abbreviations and metric units. Another thing is when you talk about a species of organism, that organism's scientific name is in italics. The genus of the organism, or genera of the organism, is capitalized. The species or specific name, is lowercase. So here's an example. Rainbow trout, Oncorhynchus micus, Oncorhynchus capitalized, micus lowercase, and it's still in italics. That's how it's written. When a sentence starts with a number, write that number out. And all numbers under 10 need to be written out. You need to write your report in past tense. You've already completed the research. You've already done it. You write it in past tense. And you write your report in first person, not third person. So if there's multiple individuals, we collected fish on blank versus the students or the researchers or the scientists collect fish on blank. Okay? Hopefully that's clear, and that will allow you to kind of go through and answer some of these questions. Now, some of these questions may not pertain to you because you're virtual. So like knowing where your library is and how to search their databases, unless they have a digital library that you can get into, you might not need this. But for those of you who are, physically coming to classes, knowing where your library is and how to search their databases, that's very important. So you'll need to figure that out. How do you use Google Scholar? A lot of people will say Google something, but if you're really after scientific information, you should use the search engine portion of Google, which is called Google Scholar. Google Scholar will search scholarly information, peer-reviewed articles. And that provides you with a little more information, a little better information, when it comes to scientific research. Easier to find peer-reviewed material. You should know the difference between primary literature and secondary literature. If you don't know this, look it up. Look up what does primary literature mean versus secondary literature. You should know this. We just talked about it. Do you quote in scientific reports? And you should know this. We didn't talk about it, but plagiarism is cheating. Plagiarism is a serious offense. If you plagiarize in the course, action will be taken on your grade. At first you'll receive a 0 for the material you plagiarized. The next time you'll receive a report that basically tells you that you've been reported to academic dishonesty group, and they can deal with your dishonesty. So that might be booting you out of the class with an F. It could be booting you out of school. Plagiarism is a serious offense. So please don't plagiarize. Paraphrase the material, cite the material, take the time to do it right, and you won't have to worry about that. All right, so with that being said, that is lab number 1, and we will go through it live, and for those of you who are going through it virtually, you should have enough information to answer the questions and turn them in.